So I just got the notice of the amended agenda and I've opened that instead of the previous one with the one word that was changed.
Correct.
Increase, decrease, That reminds me of one of my chemistry professors that used to quip, "Oh, what's a power of 10 among friends?" As you were counting moles and things, right? It's a chemistry joke, sorry.
There was also the ancient line by Senator Everett Dirksen about the federal budget.
Yes, for billions, I think, yes.
$1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon we're talking about real money.
Yep. You see the guy that won the most recent, I don't know, whatever lottery thing was up, walked home with a check for over $900 million.
Oh, geez.
After everything.
No.
That's real money.
That's real money. And he's going to be getting calls from a lot of real friends and real cousins and everybody else too.
I think I might even be a relative.
Yeah, right.
Hello, Greg.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hello, Greg.
Hi.
Hey.
Okay, it is now 6 o'clock and we have all arrived.
Well, all except Director John Jex. And I'm unclear as to whether he's not available to join us at all this evening or whether he's going to join us for the closed session, but can't join us for the open session. Do we have any clarification on that?
We do not, sir. Our expectation is that he will not be joining us tonight. And in that case, in your role as the vice president, you will assume his role as the presiding officer to run the meeting, sir.
Okay. And if he does join us unexpectedly within the next few minutes, then I assume that I can certainly defer to him and have him join whatever part that he can be a part of.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay, well then should we get started?
Yes.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the Moraga-Orinda Fire District Protection Board of Directors regular board meeting, February 15th, 2023. I will open the session and then we will go into closed session and then we will go into open session after the close of the closed session. So as acting chairman and presiding officer, I am going to call the meeting to order. Marcia, do we start with a roll call?
Yes. Director Danziger,
Here.
Director Hassler,
Here.
Director Jorgens,
Here.
Vice President Romer,
Here.
and President Jex is absent.
So let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Does anybody want to lead the Pledge of Allegiance or should we just do it jointly? In the absence of, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all. All right, so we move on to the consent agenda, and that involves adopting Resolution 23-05, re-ratifying the findings and determining the need to continue holding remote meetings by teleconference. And since this is on the consent agenda and it is a matter of routine nature and non-controversial, is any member requesting that any item be withdrawn from the consent agenda for separate consideration? Do we need to take public comment on this? I don't think we do. Do we, Marcia?
And we will take a motion and a second, and then we do not have any attendees, so we can then take a roll call.
I'll
of the
make a
vote.
motion to adopt 23-05.
Second, Craig,
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Okay, so we're on to item 3, which is public comment is open on closed session items. Do we then open that for public comment, Marcia?
We do, and we do not have any participants, and we've not received any written public comment.
Okay, so then we move to close public comment on item 3. And the governing board has adjourned. Do we need a motion to adjourn, or is that automatic?
We can automatically adjourn to closed session.
Okay, so we will reopen the open session at 7 p.m. after the conclusion of the closed session.
and do just remember there's a separate link that you got a separate email for that goes to that thing.
That's right.
Okay.
And I'm gonna have to go back out and
All
do
right.
that. Okay.
So Christine, you should have the closed session link. So you'll leave this meeting and go to closed session.
Oh, because I just got that one link.
Yeah, so the link I sent to
Yeah.
Jenica is,
Uh-huh.
that is the closed session. I can, resend.
Oh. Okay, I'll just find that email. That's fine.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Good evening. Do we have everyone here?
We
is,
do.
All right.
no, is Director Danziger here?
I don't see him.
I don't think I see him.
Oh, Director Danzer is not here.
He was in he was in the other meeting a minute ago, so we know
Yeah.
he's around.
Let
Yeah.
me check. Let me check on him. Director Danziger has arrived.
Present.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. This is the regular open session of the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District Board of Directors meeting, February 15th, 2023. We are reconvening the meeting in open session. This is Vice President Mike Romer. John Jex is not with us. So under the procedure that we follow, I am tasked with the responsibility of being the presiding officer and chairing this meeting. And I will call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call?
Director Danziger,
Here.
Director Hassler,
Here.
Director Jorgens,
Here.
Vice President Romer.
Here. Item 6, report of closed session act. We have nothing to report at this time. It's an ongoing matter. Item 7, public comment is open for items not on the agenda. Do we have, Marcia, any public comment?
We do not have any hands raised, and I've not received any written public comment.
Okay. Moving, then I'm closing public comment on item 7 and moving on to item 8, which is a proclamation recognizing Black History Month of February 2023.
Good
And
evening,
go
Director.
ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Good evening, directors. Read the proclamation. Whereas during Black History Month, we celebrate the many achievements and contributions made by African Americans to our economic, cultural, spiritual, and political development. And whereas Carter G. Wilson, a Black historian, established a week to recognize the accomplishments of Black American citizens on February 7th, 1926, which became one of the cultural landmarks of contemporary America. And the second week of February was chosen for the event because it coincided with the birthday of Abraham Lincoln on February 12th and Frederick Douglass on February 14th. And whereas Black History Month is a time for families in our community to reflect on the many contributions that Black Americans of all ages have made to our country, it offers a time for family and neighbor conversations about the importance of celebrating and recognizing these tremendous contributions. And whereas the Moraga-Orinda Fire District feels it is important to communicate its support for inclusivity and respect in our district, and the Board of Directors encourages all members of our community to remember and celebrate the contributions that African Americans have made to this nation and the importance of diversity and inclusion in our community, and that racial equality must always be a cornerstone of democracy. And whereas the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District is proud to honor the history and contributions of African Americans in our community throughout our state and nation, and now therefore be it resolved that the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District Board of Directors do hereby proclaim February 2023 as Black History Month in recognition of African Americans, past and present, in our community.
Thank you, Chief.
So I move that we approve this proclamation. I guess we have to comment, sir.
I wanted to just make one comment. Vice President Romer, this Director Danziger, I wanted to thank the staff for putting this proclamation together. And just feel that it's important for this board to have this proclamation to honor the history and contributions of African Americans in our community. So thank you, staff, and thank you, board.
Thank you, Director Danziger. Should we open public comment? Do we need public comment on item 8.1, the proclamation?
We do.
Marcia?
We do not have any hands raised, and I've not received any written public comment.
Okay, thank you. So we will move on to closing public comment on the proclamation. We move on to,
Oh, we have to, oh, don't we have to approve it. So
I don't know that that's necessary. Can we by acclamation move for unanimous approval without taking a roll call? Or do we even need to do that?
You don't, sir.
No, I think it's a done deal. And I appreciate the Director Denzinger and the chief and the staff as well. But I think we move on.
All right.
So item 9.1, a second reading adoption of ordinance 23-01, adopting the 2022 edition of the California Fire Code with certain amendments, and by reference, the International Fire Code 2021 edition published by the International Code Council, and repealing ordinance number 20-01. So I think we go on to the staff review for at first.
Yes, good evening, directors. The item before you is the second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-01, the addition and amending of the California Fire Code. This had the first reading last month in January. In your packet or comments that were received and discussion held at the January meeting, the board directed staff to remove section 503.4.1, which had to do with traffic calming measures. You will see in your packet that there is a fire code that shows that red line, and another copy of the fire code that shows that completely removed. We have not received any additional public comments or comments from the town of Moraga or city of Orinda. Happy to answer any questions that the directors may have.
Are there questions of the staff by the district board members?
So just be clear, those sections pertaining to traffic calming are no longer part of this this code.
Yes, sir. We
Okay.
were amending that section, so the language that we added to 503.4.1 has been removed. In the state code, there is still a section 503.4.1, but it does not have the language that we were directed to remove or was the city had concerns with.
Okay, I had one other specific question because somebody just this evening, earlier today, emailed me and asked me the question, so I'm just going to ask it.
Yes, sir.
If I'm reading section 105.6.25, has to do with construction permits required in certain cases. So if somebody is putting in a new driveway, do they need a permit from MOFD?
Yes, sir.
They do, no matter what it is, right?
Correct. Fire access for fire apparatus. That's defined as fire apparatus access road, sir.
Just a driveway. Okay. That was my only question.
Really? So any driveway?
Yes, sir.
Wow. Okay. Are there criteria under which we have to not accept it or accept?
Yes, sir. That's found in chapter 5 of the fire code.
That's what I thought. Okay. So, Mr. President, I do have a couple questions. So Chief, you and I went over a number of questions earlier today, some of which needed some rewording. So what, does that screw up our whole process here for approving things, or?
Well, yes, sir. As so for specific to there's some areas where, as the director pointed out, and as we discussed last month, there are some areas where the code gives the fire code official a tremendous amount of discretion, and usually that's designed to allow and to facilitate the adaptation of the intent of the code to the real world conditions that we experience, not all of which can be explicitly spelled out in the fire code. Therefore, there's a degree of discretion that can be applied and subjective interpretation of the code that has to occur on a regular basis. With regard to the discussion of when Specific areas should require a degree of discretion that perhaps is too sweeping. We propose that the staff produces, and we'd be happy to submit to the board for review. Staff produces internal policies and info sheets that would guide an applicant towards when these particular provisions would be required. A driveway would be a good example. Is the driveway, are you changing the width of the driveway? Yes, no. Does the driveway grade exceed 18%? Are you replacing it with a drivable surface such as asphalt, or are you using an aggregate base? Those sort of things that would help an applicant understand what would be required of them in order to move forward with their application. And that I think is the appropriate answer on the elements that were included in the code having to do with 401.1, where we could produce an applicant sheet that would make clear to the resident when these requirements would apply, so that we preserve the flexibility that would allow the fire code to be conformed to unanticipated circumstances with the fire code officials' discretion, but we also provide certainty to the residents about what conditions or what circumstances we're reviewing and what criteria would trigger which particular elements of the particular section of the code.
So should we go through and list the places that we want to see one of each of those documents that are be a separate procedure from the fire code?
Yes, sir. We're happy to, and I would say not necessarily a separate procedure from the fire code, but interpretation of the fire code that we could standardize. And this was very similar to what we were trying to do with the section for traffic calming measures, that rather than it living in the fire code, we can certainly produce interpretations of the fire code in writing to ensure a uniform application and to decrease the confusion and the uncertainty about what would be required to move forward with an application that required a permit.
So I have a list of a couple of places that we discussed earlier that I'd like to make sure we have such a procedure.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir.
Do you want me to go through them, or do you know what they already are?
I think it would be helpful in order to have a wholesome discussion, to list them off so we could make note of them, and then if any other directors had amplifying remarks, we could capture those all at once, sir.
Okay. So and tell me if we already talked about it and there was already an answer that someplace else in the broader code that, you know, these were little snippets and it didn't necessarily put them all in context. So if I've forgotten what you said about one of them and I happen to include it again, I apologize.
Yes, sir.
So I don't know what the easiest way to refer to it. Page 22 of the whole document, which is section and page 8 of this ordinance, it's section 403.11.1, standby personnel. And I think you had said that this is one of those that they have the ability, if you have a dance at a gym or something, if they, as long as they meet all the current standards, you don't, the fire chief doesn't have the ability to force, you know, having emergency personnel standing by outside as long as they aren't having too many people. I'll let you answer it, but.
Yes, sir. So the question is when would we require standby personnel, which would be fire safety folks who would be stationed at that location at the expense of the applicant, which obviously could impede people's ability to use their facility. And the answer on that, which we're happy to put in writing, is that if it is a use for which the occupancy was not designed and is not classified for, such as you have a warehouse and you're going to hold an assembly, bring a bunch of people into the warehouse. The warehouse wasn't designed to hold lots of people. It isn't permitted for that. That would be the sort of thing where, in the estimation of the fire code official, it is possible that the number of people who are going to be brought into that place would exceed the parameters under which the existing fire protection and life safety measures that were built into the structure would be inadequate. We could require standby. The best example of that in our case would be if there was a posted occupancy, or sorry, a posted load limit, the total number of people you could have in that site, and you were proposing to have more people in that site, that would be a circumstance where, on approval, we could potentially approve a variance with additional provisions. Or if there's an element of the fire and life safety system, such as the sprinklers, the fire detectors, the panic hardware on the door, something like that. If some element of the fire and life safety system was inoperable, standby personnel could be used in lieu to offset the risk posed by that. or if there was something that exceeded the parameters under which that occupancy is normally used. A good example of that would be if you had a gymnasium that was going to have a bunch of people in it, you wanted to set off pyrotechnics around halftime or something of that nature. Those would be the sort of things where it would be either exceeding the number of people that it was posted for, using it for a purpose other than the occupancy was designated. If there was an element of the fire and life safety system was either inoperable or ineffective, or you were proposing a novel use such as pyrotechnics that was deemed to pose a significant threat to life and life safety.
And the way to say it the other way around is, as long as you didn't go out of bounds in any of those things, you wouldn't have to. He wouldn't have discretion.
That's correct, sir.
Okay,
I think the summary sort of be if you're following the parameters under which that building was approved for, you are playing by the rules, and the system is engineered to handle the load and the usage you're anticipating, and we don't require anything further than that.
Exactly. Okay. And then we talked about 503.1.5, the existing fire trail systems. We talked about the idea that it could be seasonal, it could be really muddy, and so they weren't, quote, maintained. Plus, it wouldn't be a fire danger if it was muddy outside anyway, most likely. But there might be some caveats to the broad language that's in here, I guess is my point.
Yes, sir. And we would propose an info sheet that would say that fire trails shall be maintained in a manner that allows access no later than June 1st of each year. And so what that coincides with our weed abatement ordinance. Obviously, there are opportunities for folks to request modifications if there is for some reason, say in Indian Valley as an example, there's several spots that have springs that make the road impassable till later in the year, and doing grading and so forth wouldn't make sense until that had dried out. The applicant could certainly submit for modifications, but we understand that there are going to be environmental conditions such as the recent heavy rains that would make either these trails impassable or make maintenance of them impractical due to a seasonal condition, and that would fall outside the scope of what we're looking. The intent here is that if by the time we get to fire season, you have been unable or unwilling to repair damage that occurred during winter with the rain typically, that if there are reasons that a portion of the trail is no longer passable, and you don't feel as the landowner who's responsible for maintaining that system, you don't feel that it is practical to repair that piece of the trail, you can't simply abandon the trail network. You have to create an alternate means of access, which would typically mean creating a new road going around the area where the slide or subsidence had occurred.
Right. And I only have the next reference. I don't have one back to the thing we agreed in the beginning we're going to delete about the bumps and things, the speed bumps, but it was in the letter from the town council of Moraga, I think, where he said that he wanted to clarify that if you put those little bumps like they have on the BART station, when you that are sound bumps, effectively not speed bumps per se, even though that is a traffic calming device, it's not a slow you down. It's a warn you you're doing it. It's not it doesn't require you to slow down. So there are things like that. That whole area that's just one example, but I think we agreed even with the Orinda mayor last time that we would come up with a set of guidelines, procedures, et cetera, that we should all discuss and work with everybody around to come up with a reasonable group. So that's just an example of something that I think is I don't say we ought to put it back in, but we need to come up with, that's another one to add to our list of procedures or whatever we're calling clarifications.
Yes, sir. And pending those further discussions, either through the 2x2 or direct staff to staff or elected official, whatever the appropriate venue is, we propose essentially issuing, there's a couple options. One is that we issue a blanket permit to the city and the town for traffic calming measures other than speed bumps, speed humps, and tabletops. Essentially physical alteration to the roadway that would substantially alter the speed over which we could travel on that road, or we can issue a statement saying those are exempt based on this finding, or we can just issue them ministerial permits, whichever is most acceptable to all parties involved.
Right. That was the end of my list.
Thanks, sir.
This Director Danziger, I have a question. Do spark arresters have like a stamp of approval on them or something that say California Building Code that they're approved?
I think Jeff's looking under the building materials list, which is maintained by the Office of State Fire Marshal. Typically, the items that are required for 7A or 337 are either found in the bill of materials listing, or they have an associated ASTM or UL stamp that is cited elsewhere saying largely in conformance with, and that lists the appropriate standard from UL or ASTM.
So I'm sorry. So the answer is yes, they do have a stamp of approval, kind of.
Well, not there won't be a stamp actually physically on the material. It would be that if you looked up the make and model, you would cross-reference that to the bill of materials list, which I think we see Jeff doing right now. And from that, you would determine that that make and model was approved for under 337 or 7A to meet or exceed those requirements. Jeff, is that one in there?
Yes, sir. I haven't found that, but that is correct. Any 7A requirements are listed in Chapter 7 or R337 of the residential code. We did put something in the fire code about spark arresters on chimneys that have to comply with the list in the building code.
Okay.
So, sir, they won't be stamped, but as Chief said, the manufacturer has to be on that list.
But things like, I'm not that familiar with building code, so I'm getting a new door. I'll just say it. I'm getting a new door, and it has like a fire rating on it. It has like a
1 hour
like a
typically.
sticker, kind of a sticker on it that says it's rated certain ways and it meets certain requirements, right?
Sure.
So I guess certain things do and certain things don't, like, so.
Well, yes, sir. It has to do with, so fire rating, say for walls, doors, windows, et cetera. And that's generally speaking, structure fire transmission from department to department. That's widespread and uniform, and the uniform building code. So manufacturers include that stamp on them. In the case of the wildland urban interface, the uniform wildland, the uniform WUI code is not very widespread adopted. California is the only state that has 7A and 337. And so in those cases, because it's such a small subset of the market, the stamp isn't generally included on the material itself, unless it is consistent with a larger standard. And for 7A and 337, it's the other way around, that the make and model are listed on the website, not on the material itself.
Your contractor's gonna, they're a licensed contractor. They have to know what the building code is, and so they'll make sure they look that up.
Yeah, you would hope so. Okay.
Are there any other questions of staff by board members? If not, we'll open the hearing and to preliminary board comments. Are there any preliminary board comments? If not, then we open it to public comments. Marcia, are there any public comments?
We do not have any hands raised. And I've not received written public comment.
Okay, so we have questions or discussion by board members.
Chief, can you just run us by, if we approve this tonight, what happens from here?
Yes, sir. So the ordinance adopting and amending the 2022 California Fire Code in its final form, we'll transmit that to the city, the town, and the county. The city, the town, and the county will then need to ratify them. And upon their ratification, those amendments will go into effect in our jurisdiction, enforced by MOFD. Because all three of those agencies are the building code official within their specific area, and the fire code is a subset of the building code. We rely on their ratification as a way to ensure we're all in alignment. In the last code cycle, we provided a presentation to the city council and the town council in conjunction with their ratification. And then the Board of Soups passed it on consent. So we've offered that to the city and the town council, but obviously it's at their discretion whether or not they would like us to come present. Either way, the next step will be transmitting the information for them and then standing by for their ratification.
And if they had, we've taken out a section that I know that the city and the town at least, talked about with the traffic calming. If they have comments on other sections and they don't ratify, does that mean it comes back to us?
It means we're stuck, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay.
We hope they're not. Obviously, it's
Right.
not for us to say, but we've transmitted the changes that were approved by the board at the last and asked for additional comments if there were any. We received an affirmative comment from the town that their concerns have been addressed, and we've received no additional list of concerns from either the county or the city.
Okay, great.
So we have proposed action by the district board. Do we need a motion now and then we take open public comment? Is that the procedure, Marcia?
Yes,
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Well, the motion would be, Director Danziger,
To
to
adopt the
approve the
second-
second reading and adoption, et
An
cetera.
adoption of ordinance 23-01. Yes.
Okay. We have a second.
Second. Jordan.
right. Can we call a vote? Oh, wait, then we have to have public comment first. Are there any public comments?
we do not have any hands raised.
So then we go directly onto the roll call, correct?
Correct. Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens,
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. So
Item
I think
9.2.
9.2, public hearing, the second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-03, establishing the fuel mitigation and exterior hazard abatement standards in all state responsibility and local responsibility areas with the district. We open this with the staff review.
Maybe within the district?
With the district, local. Should I read it again? It's a
No,
second
I think
reading
it's a typo.
There's a typo at the end there. It should say within the district.
within the district.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Thank you.
Good evening, directors. The item before you tonight is the second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-03, the exterior hazard abatement section. This was previously listed in the 2020 fire code. Based on comments given by the Office of the State Fire Marshal, we removed it out of the fire code and put it in its own separate ordinance. Discussion was had last month that's contained in the staff report. Staff has not received any additional public comments on this ordinance, and I am happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay, questions of staff by the district board members?
I have just one question. Just for zones 1 and 2. It states that non-irrigated brush is not permitted, which I totally understand. So I'm just asking a kind of what if we have in zones, particularly like in zone 2, if you had a coyote brush that is, pruned up and it's irrigated. Are we okay with that?
Yes, sir. So the only time the fire code makes distinctions around species are eucalyptus, Monterey pines within 6 feet of the structure, or juniper and bamboo within 10 feet of the roadside.
Right.
We try very hard not to make distinctions between species, mostly because it's so hard to tell what is what. There's many different
Okay.
names for things. People don't always know. And quite frankly, regardless of the species, all vegetation, if it's maintained in the manner just as you described, is likely to burn. And so if you are using coyote brush in that zone and it's properly maintained and irrigated, it would not be subject to this prohibition. And on the other hand, if you were using rosemary as an example, and it was not maintained and it was not irrigated, it would be subject to it. So we try to focus on the condition under which the material is maintained, not the genus of the plant.
Okay. So does irrigation include like, like spray irrigation? It's not just, can it include, when you say irrigation, does it include like drip irrigation as well as spraying? Is that?
Yes,
come
sir.
under-
It could be drip, it could be buried, it could be
Any kind of
sprayed.
irrigation?
It could be simply any manner that is artificially delivering water to that plant outside of the rainy season.
Yeah.
In order to maintain high live fuel moistures as we move into the fall months when we experience our destructive fire weather.
Okay, right, thank you.
Sir.
Any other questions by board members? If not, we'll open the hearing and open it to preliminary board comments. Any preliminary board comments? Hearing none, shall we move on to public comments?
We
Marcia,
do
you
not, no, we do not have any hands raised, and I do not have any written public comment.
So we move on to questions or discussion by the district board members. Hearing none, are we ready for proposed action by the district board? Do I hear a motion?
I move that we approve the second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-03, establishing fuel mitigation and exterior hazard abatement standards in all state responsibility and local responsibility areas within the district.
I'll second that.
Roll call, please. Oh, wait a minute. We did public comment first. Sorry.
We do not have any public comment on the motion.
Now we can take a roll call.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Agenda item 9.3, a second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-04, adopting the requirements for fuel breaks on parcels in both the state responsibility and local responsibility areas within the fire district, adopting findings of fact and repealing ordinance 22-02. Staff review, please.
Good
Oh, wait a
evening.
minute. So before we do that, do I have to waive the first reading of the ordinance 23.03?
We are waiving the second reading. My apologies. That should read waive the second reading.
We waived. Okay, so we can move on to the staff review.
Correct.
Thank you. Sorry.
Good evening, directors. The item before you is a second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-04, adopting requirements for fuel breaks on parcels in both SRA and LRA areas. This had a first reading at last month's meeting, with discussion and comments are attached to the staff report. I believe we have received a couple of emails on this item that were included in the packet for the board to review. We have not made any changes to the ordinance, and I'm happy to answer any questions the directors may have.
So questions of staff by district board members.
Vice
Go
President.
ahead, Craig.
So this one and the last one were ordinances which don't have to get approved by county and the cities and the town or all those things, right? These are just ordinances that we approve.
Yes, sir, that's correct.
So the only reason I was asking was we're gonna repeal the old one and pass the new one. I just want to make sure we weren't gonna have a gap in there anyplace.
And this Director Danziger here. I just want to make clear, especially, for the public and in regards to some correspondence we did receive, that this ordinance 2304 does take into consideration and does apply to all public, all property within our district, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
Not
we're
exactly.
talking-
Go ahead,
Go
Jeff.
ahead, sir.
Okay, so I mean, I'm just thinking of East Bay Regional Park, East Bay Mud, University of California, PG&E, the city and the town.
So no, sir.
Okay,
Federal land is specifically exempt from local jurisdiction, as is state land. So land owned by the state of California, specifically Caltrans, is not right away, but land they own on both sides of Highway 24, as well as there's a very small piece of the University of California system that is within the
Okay.
district up by the steam trains. That is specifically exempt from district's authority, as are portions of PG&E's lands, which are portions of them are regulated by the CPUC, which takes primacy over local jurisdiction. But with regard to the other entities and it's important to note that in those cases, both the federal land, state land, and portions of the PG&E land, that's because it's regulated by someone else. So in the portion of the state land is regulated by the Office of the State Fire Marshal. And they do not delegate that authority. That is retained in a way that CAL FIRE does not retain their authority, as they've delegated with 4291 for the district to enforce. But in the case of those other landowning public entities, MOFD is the jurisdiction having authority. So if MOFD were not to enforce our codes and ordinances and so forth, there would be no enforcement because MOFD is the agency having jurisdiction in that case, in a way MOFD is not when it comes to the state land and the federal land.
understood. And
President-
Director
Vice President
Jorgens.
Romer.
Go ahead.
So I think, some of the public comment questioned whether, we were sort of using a big stick and rather than having discussions with these folks. And my knowledge is that the chief and his staff have had extensive, or at least tried to have extensive discussions. And I think they have had discussions with effectively all these agencies about, trying to enforce it, what the rationale was for it, how we could work together. So I think it's been as collaborative as it could be, but I think it came down at the end of the day to I'm sorry, you don't have authority over me. They didn't want to listen to what we had to say because I'm going to guess our rules were a lot more strict than what they wanted to live up to. And so they basically used the excuse that we don't feel we're under your jurisdiction. And I think part of what we did with taking this out of the fire code is we thought there was a possibility that the fire code might not have had jurisdiction, but these ordinances would have jurisdiction. And that's one of the reasons we put it into ordinances versus leaving it in the fire code.
Yes, sir. To be specific, East Bay Parks alleged in writing to this board that our previous amendments to the fire code that included vegetation management were unenforceable, not just in their case, but in all cases, because it was inappropriate for those to be within the fire code. So this change is in response to that concern, which the state did not clarify. And I should also clarify that from a cooperative standpoint and working together, those conversations continue. We continue to collaborate with all of our landowning stakeholders, to include the state and the local jurisdictions on a regular and ongoing basis. So that conversation is certainly continues as it has over the last several years.
Understood.
And Chief, this ordinance states that we may issue citations.
Yes, sir.
And I would just like to hear, I mean, living here in the district and driving around and hiking and things. I mean, certainly the city, the town, if you really wanted to scrutinize it, the city, the town, East Bay Parks, and anyone else, any of those other jurisdictions may be in violation. What do we have a policy about issuing citations to these groups? I mean,
policy is the same as for any, and there's nothing about our policies or our administrative citation ordinance that calls out a different policy dependent on who the landowner is. However, as we said several times during the 2019 fire code process, we remain committed that a citation will never be the first form of communication from the district. So that a citation, particularly a citation with a fine associated, is always a last resort after all of our other means have been exhausted. And we've engaged in the outreach, educations, and where appropriate incentive efforts with the form of the chipper and other incentives that are available. We've engaged in all of those processes first before we get to a citation. The citations would only be reserved for those who, having been made aware of the requirement and haven't been provided the opportunity to comply with the requirements or to request a modification as allowed either formally by the fire code or now in the ordinance, had not been willing to do so or were unable to do so, as we saw with at least several cases that have come for lien hearings in the past, where it wasn't a matter of will, it was a matter of ability. But so there is no, to answer your question, there is no specific procedure outlined for any particular landowner. Any landowner in the district, other than the state and federal lands, is subject to the same process.
Okay, and I would think as a board, I mean, I'm going to speak for myself, as I would trust that you and your staff would engage with all those property owners. I'm specifically thinking about the city and the town before anything, along the citation would be used.
Yes, sir. As we have done in past years, we continue to engage, we continue to invest a significant amount of staff time to ensure that the requirements are understood and to help share the lessons learned we've gleaned from working with other parcel owners so they can benefit from that experience.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I will open the hearing for preliminary board comments. Are there any? If not, then we can open it for public comments. Marcia?
We do have one hand raised.
Okay.
And before I promote that person to talk, I have implemented a timer that will display which I'm going to show right now. And you should be able to see a timer on my screen.
I do.
I do.
Yes.
Great. So I am going to promote Jonathan Goodwin to talk.
Okay,
Mr. Goodwin, I will announce when I start the timer, and the 3-minute timer will be displayed as well for you to see.
welcome, Jonathan.
Good evening, and I do see the timer. First, I want to say that, the new kid's doing a pretty good job running the meeting. I just wanted to note that.
Thank you.
Secondly, you're welcome. The legality of this, the legality of requiring fuel breaks on public lands, agencies that are chartered by the state, seems very questionable to me. I mean, it doesn't seem hard because the code doesn't really say that. This is being implied. This is a kind of pulled out of the hat. It just seems to me, with having no great background in all of this. And so it seems to me it's probably going to go to court if the knives are going to come out, as I heard one person say, not in public. And so I'm wondering what the financial burden to the district, how much the board is willing to pay for this. I would like some understanding of that. Secondly, in terms of Director Jorgens was talking about, of course, there have been hours and hours of discussions already. And I was telling a neighbor about this, and he says, about the emails I sent, and he said, well, isn't that nice that you're defending these big public agencies against the fire district? And I had to laugh at that. They're not paying me enough to do this. My concern is that the fire prevention activities be long-term and effective. That's it. And the discussions have been on the basis not of how do we cooperate as peers, but as I'm the enforcer and you're the violator. Let's talk. So, I mean, prior to the current management, that had never happened. And, a lot of things didn't get done, frankly. But things did get done when people actually did try to collaborate. I hope you received the email I sent today, where I tried to lay out what the process might look like. The problem is nothing gets written down. And so there's no continuity from year to year, or, like have a rotation. First, we'll do this area, then we'll do that area. I mentioned the chimney being cleared out. That's practical. That's life-saving potentially. Doing this 100-foot fire break is not in many, many places. So there's no prioritization. There's no record keeping. There's no organization. And this, I think, is a huge drawback. And I hope that in time the district will learn what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Marcia, do we have other public comments?
We do not have any more hands raised. We did receive the written public comment from Mr. Goodwin today, in addition to the correspondence that was sent and included in the packet under correspondence received.
And I read and appreciated all of that. I think we move on to board without any further public comments. I think we move on to questions and discussions by the board members. Is there any discussion by the board members? All right, hearing none, we move on to proposed action by the district board.
So
Go ahead, Craig, did you want to?
We approve 9.3, the second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-04, adopting requirements for the fuel breaks of parcels in both the state responsibility and local responsibility areas within the fire district, and also adopting the findings of fact and repeal ordinance 22-02.
I'll second that.
Since we have a motion and a second, that we open it for further public comment on the proposed action.
We do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
So we move on to the action by the district board, which I think calls for a roll call, correct, Marcia?
Correct. Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. 9.4, second reading and adoption of ordinance 23-03, revising a schedule of fees for district services. Staff review, please.
Good evening, directors. The item before you is the second reading and adoption of ordinance 2302, revising schedule of fees for district services. This ordinance was brought to the board last month for first reading. The fees have been updated based on the consumer price index. Several new fees have been added for repeated false alarms in a 30-day consecutive period. We have not received any public comments regarding this ordinance, and I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Questions of staff by the board members?
Sorry, I have one just general question.
Go ahead, Director Danziger.
Can we amend the fee schedule, during the year if things come up?
Yes, sir. This is certainly the board could reopen the fee schedule at any time. Typically, we only bring it forward on an annual basis in alignment with the CPI increase. But this is something the board could revisit at any time if it so choose, either to modify. Obviously, we cannot do anything that exceeds cost recovery, but to create new or to subdivide or otherwise modify fees as long as it do not exceed our actual cost of providing the service.
Okay, thank you.
Hearing no other questions, I will open the hearing.
Oh,
Go ahead, Director Jorgens. Sorry.
So in the past, we had talked about the idea that there were some challenges we were having with some of the local medical service entities that were using us as a resource of first resort instead of last resort.
Yes, sir.
And that we thought maybe that was being a little bit abused. Have we made any progress on that, or do we think that's something we should be addressing?
Oh, no, sir. The problem's been corrected. The price signaling that our fee schedule introduced with at the management level where staff decisions, et cetera, are made, corrected the problem in very short order. And we have not had a problem with those end of shift calls to declare out patients. With the times we have seen calls in that time frame have by and large been legitimate need for a patient who required transport just happened to fall at that time of day. But the things that potentially could have been abusive of the 911 system have been cured, sir.
Excellent. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I will open the hearing for preliminary board comments. Anyone? Hearing none, let's open it for public comments.
We do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
Questions or discussion by the board members? Hearing none, do we have a proposed action by the board?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to accept the second reading and adoption of ordinance 2302, revising the schedule of fees for district services.
Do we have- Second?
Yeah, Jorgens.
Okay. Public comment on the proposed action?
We do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
I think that puts it up for a vote.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. We now have announcements. Item 10.1, brief information only, reports relating to meetings attended by a director at district expense. Do we have any? We move on to announcement 10.2, questions and informational comments from board members and staff. Announcement 10.3, communications received. Number one, there was an email from Ellen Dale. Number two, an email from Jonathan Goodwin, and a third email from Jonathan Goodwin, all of whom I'm aware of and I read carefully. Is there any other action needed to be taken or comments that are necessary under this agenda item, Marcia?
No.
Then we will move on to announcements, section 10.4, the fire chief updates. A, the finance report.
Evening, directors. We'll begin with Finance Manager Mary Smith.
Good evening, directors. I have a brief finance report for you. The first thing is the strike team reimbursement update estimated for 2022-2023. We have a strike team receivable of $1 million. OES payments received $987,000 with a net receivable outstanding to date of $42,540. The only remaining outstanding receivables are for the flood preposition assignments in January. The strike team assignments for this summer have all been paid by OES.
Yay.
Next slide.
John Jex would be proud of you. So are we, but I'm just saying.
Yes.
Fiscal year 22 audit. The audit is scheduled for this week, and we received a list of items from the auditors today, and so we'll be providing those audit items with the report expected in March. And an RFP for the new audit has been issued for next year. The audit RFP was issued on January 27th. Proposals are due on March 3rd, and the audit contract awarded by the board will be April 19th, with responses being brought to the board. And that concludes my report, unless you have any questions.
Director,
Go ahead, Director Jorgen.
So last time we had expressed the concern that, in the last time we came up with an auditor, nobody bid, literally nobody bid. And so a question is, has anybody bid? And if not, what do we plan on doing?
We don't have any bids yet, but we do have interest from a couple of different audit firms. So we
Yes,
are
and
waiting.
I can jump in here. I was very targeted about who I sent the RFP to. Particularly, I looked at the different audit firms that audit City of Orinda, Town of Moraga, and so forth. So, and then we had 2 audit firms that sent they basically sent follow-up questions to the RFP with, extensive, questions and details about things. So I think that we will get a firm to bid.
Because I think it was 2 times ago, we got some bids and they were crazy numbers. Before we finally went out and found one, I think they, a long time ago, we got crazy numbers that came in. So it sounds like you're doing some good outreach. Thank you. But I'm just concerned that, if we could either end up with no bids, which happened once at least, or we could end up with crazy bids. And I'm just wondering if we are, or if we're allowed to sort of, actually go out and, beg versus just send out RFPs.
So I allowed time. That's why the proposals are due March 3rd. So we'll know March 3rd, where we'll know where we're at. And then we have another, till April 19th effectively so if we need to regroup between March 3rd and April 19th, there's some time built in there for that.
Okay. But I guess it was more a procedural question. I know we have to send out RFPs and do competitive bidding and all that, but if we don't find any of them to be acceptable, are we allowed by law to go out and and try to find other people without doing an RFP again?
Yes, I think we could do that.
That was kind of a legal question, I think, but okay, good, great.
Are there any other questions for the finance manager?
Nope.
No.
If not, we'll move on to the human resource report. Christine Russell.
Good evening, directors. Tonight, I have a brief recruitment update. So first off, our 2 firefighter paramedic trainees have started the Livermore Pleasanton Fire Academy on January 30th. The academy will last for approximately 20 weeks, and their graduation date should be at some point in June. And then finally, in regards to the fuels mitigation specialist position, a candidate has successfully completed the background process and will be starting with the district on Monday, February 27th. This individual will be introduced to the board at the March meeting. This concludes my update for tonight. Thank you.
As a brief preview, as you will see more of this next month through work spearheaded by the city of Orinda. The district has been awarded a line item $800,000 allocation by the state government via our local assembly member, Rebecca Bayer-Cahan, to fund 2 additional fuel mitigation specialists for 3 years. And we'll move forward to roll the current recruitment into that in conjunction with bringing that item forward to the board for acceptance and a budget adjustment to accept those funds to expand the size of our fuel mitigation force with that generous funding from the state.
So that was an earmark. It's actually now it got approved.
Yes, sir.
Wow, great job.
Great.
We got that too late to make this packet, but we'll have it in March with the proposed adjustment, and then with a little luck, we'll have some folks starting essentially the next day to fill those positions.
And we need to send a nice letter back to
Yeah.
the representative, Rebecca.
Bayer-Cahan.
Pronounce her last name.
Yes,
Bayer-Cahan.
Yes, thank you.
So Chief, did you say you're going to use the applications that came in last time, or you're going to reopen?
No, so we obviously it would take a look at what the list looks like, but
Okay.
we have at least one person on the current list who would be a good fit. We can plug them right in and move very quickly to fill those positions.
All right. Thank you.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have Fire Marshal provide an update on the Tunnel East Bay Hills fuel break.
Good evening, directors. I'll hit the fire marshal report since it's up first. Only 5 total complaints so far this year, 2 for dead tree exterior hazard abatement. The 35 property transfer inspections without an exterior hazard abatement ordinance. We took this opportunity to go out and meet with the realtors and the homeowners to educate them on what should be done and how to protect their property from wildfire, and highlighted what we think will come through in the ordinances. We were also able to close 47 cases from last year. They did comply with the notices that they were given from last year. We haven't been able to do any other exterior hazard abatement inspections pending the passage of the ordinance. Chipping, we have several folks scheduled. So once we bring on that new fuels mitigation specialist, we're going to provide them chipper training, and we're going to get out there and do our chipping. Last year we had 11 days, again, due to the not having the chipper, the chip truck. We hope to exceed that 11 days, and I think we have enough people scheduled right now so that we can do that. Current projects working on fuel reduction projects. The fuel mitigation specialists are helping emergency preparedness coordinator Dennis Rain on the pile burning and stuff like that. I do have an update on the Tunnel East Bay Hills fuel break. We have been working with our environmental consultant to do the paperwork for the categorical exemption to CEQA. We will have a PowerPoint presentation for the board next month from our environmental consultant. The process for that will then be to take any direction or input that the board has, incorporate that into the PowerPoint, and then do meetings with other non-government organizations. And then we will set up site walks for Department of Fish and Wildlife, water quality, walk them through project areas that they have concern, highlighting our mitigation. Once all that's done, we will submit the paperwork. 30 to 45 days is the turnaround we're seeing through the Cal VTP process, and then we can start a heavy push doing the work on the fuel break. Happy to take any questions the directors may have.
Vice President Romer, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Jorgens.
So maybe it's a typo, but the top under it says property transfers 35, and nobody passed initially and nobody failed initially.
Yes, sir, because we didn't have a ordinance or a code in effect. We couldn't say, hey, you failed or you passed. We just took this as an opportunity to educate the property owners on what they should be doing to protect their property.
So are we going to go back after now that we have an ordinance, or we don't quite yet, I guess, have one, huh?
No, sir. These aren't retroactive. These are going forward. So, I think staff did a very good job of threading the needle of we cannot require you to do this thing at this time because we have no ordinance. However, These are the things that are consistent with fire safety. These are the things that would have normally been provided. We would encourage you to do them as a matter of being a good neighbor in this community.
Okay.
And maybe even avoiding liability later on down to the buyer who says you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Although there wasn't an ordinance in effect, so I don't know how persuasive that is.
Yes, sir. There's up until the passing of the ordinance, there were no requirements for exterior fuel mitigation over the last 2 months.
Hey, Fire Marshal, this is Director Danziger. Could
Yes,
you
sir.
give us some indication of when you do the transfers, like, just some ballpark on how many transfers are done, like self-assessments, and how many, we have to go out or do something further?
The vast majority, sir, require us to go out. We do have some that do the self-assessment and send pictures.
Yeah.
Pictures worth 1,000 words, and what we're finding is when we do pass somebody based on their pictures, a lot of times we'll get a neighbor complaint and we'll have to go back out. So staff fuels mitigation manager Gordon Graham, he looks at those and sees, hey, is there anything in question? Is there any red flags that trigger him to make a phone call and go out there or just do a quick drive-by? But we have, I don't have the exact number, but we have passed some on that self assessment.
And so if we do have to do the drive-by or go actually based on a complaint, say, then they have to pay the fee? Or not necessarily, if you just do it?
Yeah, if they're doing it and they submitted the photos, and for whatever reason their photographic skills weren't that great, we
Okay.
don't charge the
Okay,
fee for that.
okay. All right. Okay, thanks.
And then directors, if I may, I forgot to cover the home hardening grant.
Ah.
So some quick information on that. We've requested to date 18,200 feet of bush fire mesh fence. We've distributed just under 4,000 feet of that. We have several requests pending that staff will work on Friday. We get different kinds of requests. Some are, hey, I just need 3 screens cut to these specific lengths. And then other requests, like one that will go out this Friday, is, hey, I need 2 rolls. So there will go 2 50-foot rolls to a neighborhood that's going to work with their neighbors and get that input in. Total cost is just over $50,000 for all the bush fire mesh fence. We have received reimbursement requests. We have approved 3 for a total of $1,024. We did receive a few other requests that were outside the time frame established by the board, so unfortunately we had to deny those reimbursement requests. Again, happy to answer any questions that the directors may have on that.
So that's a total of $51,000 expended so far?
Yeah, roughly in there, sir. I have the cost for the additional 4 shipments. I did not get the cost for our trial shipment. We had basically two trial shipments totaling 2,050 feet. As the program started, we weren't sure what the demand was going to be, so we just bought a limited amount. And then as the demand picked up, we went ahead and made a large purchase.
Thank you. Any other board questions of staff? Thank you.
Hi, good evening, directors. My name is Lucas Lambert. I'm battalion chief responsible for operations for our district. And tonight I'll be giving a brief overview of what our crews have been up to for the previous month. Next slide, please. Oftentimes we receive questions from the public of what firefighters do when we aren't attending to emergencies. And that's what my presentation will focus on tonight. Oftentimes when we're not responding or attending to emergencies, it can be summarized as training, cleaning, preparing for the next incident, preparing our equipment, and conducting our annual, weekly, daily inspections. As you see here in the picture on the left, during this time of year, our crews take advantage of weather conditions to complete annual service for many of our programs. Annual hose testing is one of the many programs that our crews are currently working on to complete. Hose testing is required by the NFPA, or National Fire Protection Association, and OSHA, or Occupational Safety and Health Administration, to reduce catastrophic failure of our fire hose. Hose is tested under pressure at recommended limit for the specific time period to confirm the integrity. During this time, our hose is also cleaned and stored either in the station or on the apparatus. Why do we do this? First, because our lives and the lives of the citizens depend on it. And second, as you can see on the picture to the right, our fire hose is susceptible to the byproducts of carcinogens and other cancer-causing materials. As you can see, the glow of the vehicle fire on the right, all of the material that contains in a vehicle fire is synthetic. Those synthetics are byproducts of cancer when they catch fire. Next slide, please. Crews have also began annual hydrant maintenance. Crews have started servicing all hydrants across the district. Typical hydrant maintenance include the removal of the caps of the hydrant, inspection of debris and rust, and providing lubrication to the caps so that they're not rusted or too tight onto the hydrant. Installation of blue reflective dots in the streets that indicate where our hydrants are at, and the painting of the caps and the bonnet, the colors that collaborate pressure and volume to the hydrant. And as you can see, the picture on the right is one example of an area that we would remove vegetation or sediment so that we can make access to the hydrant in the event of an emergency. And this is part of our annual hydrant program. Next slide, please. Training is another large component, as I had mentioned, and on January 28th, MOFD conducted a Department Operations Center drill. Communication volunteers worked alongside of our Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, Dennis Rain, and his counterpart from the City of Lafayette to exercise how we can coordinate internally in the event of a system-wide communications outage. Additionally, the picture in the center, this is one example of the East Bay Mud Water Treatment Facility in Orinda that's conducting a large retrofit of their site. We're working with them currently for site visits and to understand their project, working towards confined space and trench rescue drills. The picture on the lower right is a collaboration with Lafayette PD for zone haven and evacuation drills. And then the picture on the far right upper corner is a communications drill that we're conducting countywide for some communications updates that we're going to see within the next few months. Next slide, please. And our programs on January 26th, firefighters trained with citizens of the La Moraga CERT program on how to use fire extinguishers and what to do if encountered with hazardous materials. To date, there are approximately 250 members of the La Moraga CERT program led by Duncan Siebert and his team. The combination of the Moraga-Orinda firefighters and CERT staff have trained well over 1,200 participants since this program has started. It's a great program, gives us an opportunity to interact with our citizens and answer questions of how they can intervene in the event that they're faced with an emergency. Thank you. Next slide, please. And our prescribed fire projects. Currently on Monday, February 13th, 30 piles were burned near the Bear Creek and Camino Pablo area at the Wagner Ranch Nature Area. These pile burns consist of vegetation material used to reduce wildfire hazards and improve conditions for native vegetation conditions in the area of the Wagner Ranch Nature Area. MOFD is coordinating the project with the Orinda Unified School District, Friends of the Wagner Ranch Nature Area, and Bay Area Air Quality Management District to ensure the burn is conducted safely and with minimal smoke impacts to the Wagner Ranch Elementary School and surrounding neighborhoods. And also I want to give recognition to Crew 12 from Contra Costa County Fire that has assisted us with this project. Next slide, please. And philanthropy, other programs. On February 4th, the Moraga-Orinda firefighters hosted the winners of the Firehouse Dinner Auction supporting the East Bay Hospice program. The recipients enjoyed a tour and dinner at Fire Station 45 in Orinda. These proceeds of the auction went to benefit the East Bay Hospice chapter. And if you aren't aware, hospice is a nonprofit that provides comfort and care to patients that have reached the final stages of their life. We want to give them a special recognition. We certainly interact with them when we attend emergencies through the 911 system. So this is an opportunity for us to further support their mission and ultimately the citizens that use them. Next slide, please. And finally, on February 7th, our firefighters volunteered their time to cook for the Ronald McDonald House as part of the Meals from the Heart charity event in Sacramento. We want to give a special recognition to the Ronald McDonald Charity and the Meals from the Heart program for supporting their mission and providing lodging and meals to families during time when a child is experiencing a medical crisis. And again, this is another program that we interface with through the 911 system and hospitals. We've experienced this both within our agency, members of our agency, and members of the public. This is a great program, and we are very grateful to be able to further support their mission as well. Next slide, please. And that concludes my operational report. I'm available for any questions the staff may have.
I don't have a question, but I just want to say I found the report quite informative, and I thank you for all the information. I think it's really helpful for the public as well as the directors to get these kind of presentations to kind of get down to beyond the numbers and the policy and ordinances that we do, but to really see what our firefighters are doing in the community. So thank you.
I also want to thank Chief Lambert for not only a great presentation, but great work within the department and the community. Thank you so much.
Good job.
Definitely. Much appreciated.
Excellent.
Unless there's any other comments or questions, we'll move on to announcement items 10.1 to 10.4. And I think at this point, we open for public comment on questions from the public relative to items 10.1 and 10.4, which are
The ones we just did.
the ones we just did.
We do not have any hands raised, and we've not received written public comment.
Then we close public comment on item 10 and move on to the consent agenda, items 11.1 to 11.4. Which would be, so I guess I open this up for the staff to handle the reports on these, correct?
No, it's just the consent agenda, and there's either comment on it or not, and then you just approve it.
Okay, all right. Is there public comment? Do we open this for public comment?
First, you'll make the motion to approve consent items 11.1 to 11.7. Then we will see if there's any comment on that motion, and then we can take roll.
All right, do we have a motion?
So I move that we approve the consent agenda items 11.1 through 11.7.
I'll second.
Then we open it for public comment.
And we do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
I will close public comment, and do we need a board deliberations on that motion? Open it for board deliberations.
And we can take roll.
All right, we'll take roll then.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens,
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Moving on to the regular agenda, item 12.1, the adoption of resolution 23.04, adopting findings of fact justifying amendments to the 2022 California Fire Code.
Wasn't this item included in the prior thing we approved?
Mm,
It was
No,
one of
sorry.
There were three things on it, and the finding of fact was the last one.
Sir, we had findings of fact for the ordinances
Oh, okay.
that are a little different. They take into consideration the fuel type. The finding of fact for the fire code is specific to geological, topographical, and I can't think of the third one off the top of my head.
Climatological.
I think it is actually.
Yeah, I think it is climate.
There's a whole lot of things that play into it. Climate's certainly one of them.
Sorry. Okay.
All right, so we take input from staff and other invited experts and ask questions for clarification. We start out with the staff report on this?
Yes.
All right, let's go ahead.
Good evening, directors. The item before you is adoption of resolution 23-4, adopting the findings of fact, justifying our amendments to the 2022 fire code. State law requires that we have findings of fact if we're going to amend our local fire code. In the past, we have put the findings of fact in the fire code, working with district council. It was decided that it should be its own separate resolution. So that's what's in front of you this evening. This came before you last month as a information item and is before you tonight to adopt. I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Questions for the fire marshal?
Nope.
All right, no questions when we discuss the item on the agenda, and invite comments or questions from the public relative to this agenda item.
And so we do have one comment, one hand raised, and I am just opening the timer.
Okay, thank you.
And Jonathan Goodwin.
We got the timer going. As soon as we get that.
Good evening.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I regret to say I cannot see how this item could possibly be voted for in good conscience. The facts presented are misleading, deliberately misleading, and there are significant facts omitted. The intent of this is obviously to mislead the directors and the public into thinking that because there are conditions outside the fire district, those are the same as what are inside the fire district. There's no evidence for that. Zero, none. Okay, there have been fires that have begun in the fire district and been catastrophic outside the fire district. There has not been one catastrophic fire within the fire district. No wind-driven fires that were, took out bunches of houses and killed people. That all happened on the other side of the hill because the conditions there are different. This is guilt by association. It's wrong. It's just wrong. And it's obviously an attempt to prey on people's or take advantage of people's fear. And that is just wrong. It's immoral. The fire in 1923, the Berkeley fire, it's called. It had no consequence in Orinda. Nobody even bothered to see where it originated. Nobody cared. It was as inconsequential as every other fire, 1924, 25, 26, 26. You will never hear about these fires. You only hear them about this one because of what it did outside the fire district. Same with the 1970 fire. Same with the two fires concurrent with the tunnel fire in 1991. The fire in 1988 is misrepresented in this document. The reason that those houses were all ignited was that the response was dramatically delayed, which is not included in this report. The response was the There was a fire at the bottom of the hill. Equipment resources went to the bottom of the hill. They found out that the fire was going up the hill. They had to pull up their hoses, turn their engines around, figure out what addresses it was going up to, pull out their hoses again. It was just too long a delay because of circumstance. That's why so many, there was no reported wind, according to my source, who was a witness, worked on that fire, became a fire captain, and then a BC, and then a sworn police officer. There, according to him, there was no wind. This should not be voted for. It should be sent back, and a realistic impression of what is going on should be included. The other thing, what's not included are, number one, there have been no catastrophic fires in this district, and number two, the places where people really could perish in a, I'll just finish this sentence if you don't mind, in
Sure.
a conventional fire. There are spots that are easy to identify in this district. They are not identified, and the consequence of this is that the spirit, it is one sentence. It's a long sentence. The effort is not going toward where it's most needed. It's being spread out as if the entire district is equally at risk, and that's a false assumption. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do we have other public comments?
We do not have any more hands raised or received written public comment.
So let me know if I'm missing anything, but do we have board deliberation next, or do we make the motion? Do we ask for a motion first? We closed public comment since there are no more public comments. So I guess it's time for a motion to be entertained if a motion is to be made.
Correct.
I move that we adopt resolution 2304, adopting findings of fact justifying amendments to the 2022 California Fire Code.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second, so we invite comments or questions from the public relative to that motion. Again, we have the limitation imposed by the procedural rules, and
we do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
all right, so I will then close public comment on 12.1, and we go on to ask for a, well, I guess we need a deliberation on the motion first. Is that correct?
Correct.
Comments by board members? Hearing no comments, I think we need a vote.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Moving on to regular agenda item 12.2, planning for return to in-person board meetings, new teleconferencing laws regarding remote attendance by board members, provide direction regarding the option to provide virtual public access to board meetings using Zoom beginning March of 2023, provide direction regarding the option to broadcast board meetings using YouTube for public observation, and provide direction regarding holding future board meetings in a single location. So we will first take input from the staff or any other invited experts and ask questions for clarification.
Good evening, directors. Since the beginning of the COVID pandemic in March 2020, all of MOFD's legislative bodies have conducted meetings via webinar or teleconference pursuant to the executive orders that are listed in the staff report. Recently, it was announced and declared that the COVID pandemic's the ability provided under emergency procedures to hold remote meetings would be rescinded at the end of February. As a result of that, staff has been planning for return to in-person meetings and taken direction from the board that we should include a virtual component to maintain the increased public access that our virtual platform has provided over the last several years, referring to this as a hybrid version. There's portions explained here. However, in essence, in accordance with the Brown Act, members of the board will continue to be able to participate via teleconference so long as the appropriate number of board members are still within the district. There are special elements provided under AB 2449, which has been enshrined in Government Code 54953F, which are included in the staff report that a director would have to follow should they choose to participate remotely under that authority. We certainly recommend that, given the complexity of that the standard teleconference requirements that previously were provided under the Brown Act, Government Code 54953B3, we'd recommend to directors that they follow that particular mechanism should they choose to participate not in person. Staff's recommendation is that we cease the previous practice of rotating our meetings between Moraga and Orinda due to the complexity of moving equipment between two sites and the limited access for Wi-Fi or internet bandwidth out of the Hacienda de las Flores that we were previously using in Moraga, and herefore use the Sarge Little Hale in Orinda as a relatively centrally located point from which our meetings could be held, while continuing to provide a Zoom option for public comment, a Zoom option as well for public to observe, and a YouTube stream that would enable those who are not using the Zoom platform to observe and continue to post both the audio and the video recordings of our meetings. Of note, prior to the pandemic, we only posted audio and there was no live stream option. As we demonstrated during the board training session at the open meeting last week, we've successfully figured out how to use existing equipment with some minor adjuncts as a result of Marshall Holbrook's tireless work in this area to figure out how to make our existing equipment work for that. We are confident that we can enable the board to meet in person, to facilitate a teleconference participation of a remote board member while enabling public observation and public comment remotely. That would include public comment in person for those who came to the meeting, public comment via written comment, as we currently have, that could be read into the agenda or read into the meeting or published with the updated agenda for public comment received prior to 5 o'clock or prior to 3 o'clock on the day of the board meeting, as well as public comment via Zoom audio for members of the public who chose to participate in that manner. Staff is seeking direction from the board tonight with regard to how to proceed. As I said, our recommendation is to direct a hybrid meeting allowing for standard pre-pandemic teleconference participation for board members who are unable to attend in person, presuming that the requirements for quorum are still met, and continue to provide the virtual public access that we just discussed using Zoom beginning at our meeting in March. And lastly, to provide direction to hold meetings at a single location going forward. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions from the board or members of the public.
Open for questions.
Well, not really a question, but
I think it's open for discussion.
understand
Let me just clarify, Director Danziger, it's open for whether you want to ask questions or open board discussion. So
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, I understand the necessity. Unfortunately, I do understand the necessity to have these meetings in one location. So we're not slighting anyone in any of in the town or city or anywhere when we do this. It's based on our ability to have the technology in one spot and not have to move it around. So I want to thank the staff for doing a thorough report, and the test that they did in our training session really worked out well. And I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to do this.
Yeah, I'd like also
Director-
to state.
Oh, go
yeah.
ahead. Director Hassler, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I just would like to say too, that I think the keeping with the option so that people can attend remotely, especially the citizens, is super helpful. And I think it's appreciated, and it does help facilitate the single location for the meeting, giving the option for people to attend remotely. So that's much appreciated, and the hard work's appreciated on that front.
Director Jorgens.
Yeah, I agree. I think having remote access for the public, especially, the attendance has gone up by a factor of 20, literally in our meetings because of that. And so I think it's a super thing. And I want to congratulate Marcia and whoever else was involved in the staff that came up with a very creative solution that appeared to work very well. And I know we'd sort of taken a first shot at this maybe a year ago, and it looked a lot harder than it, and I think they came up with an even more creative solution now that's going to be relatively inexpensive and works well.
And I have one more comment is that, I guess as a question too, I don't see attached to this report really anything. I remember hearing some numbers before of how much this might cost us, but I don't really see that you're asking for any additional funding. So I'm assuming that we don't have to approve any funding, that it can come out of fire chief's contingency or. And
Yes, sir. Largely based on Marcia's creativity and her ability to access the network of other city clerks to harvest lessons learned from them, and the city of Orinda's generosity with access to their facility. We were able to build out the kit. It was incidental cost for additional connectors and so forth.
Right. And I did note that when we had the training, I believe it was a MOFD staff person who was, doing some work on some of the equipment. Are we going to have a person like that, another person at the meetings to do this?
Yes, sir. We utilized one of our field mitigation specialists. In this case, it would be overtime. However, that's a nominal cost given the few hours and the infrequent nature of our meetings.
Okay, well, thank you.
Good job.
I agree with all of that.
Yes.
Commend the staff. I'm looking forward to a proposal that appears to be on the road to satisfying everyone's concerns. I think we invite comments or questions from the public relative to this agenda item now. Marcia,
So
do
we have one hand raised, Jonathan Goodwin. I'm opening the timer. Jonathan Goodwin.
Yeah, all you people would be too young to remember this, but long ago, there was a time when the district actually had its own dedicated meeting room where everything was just sort of set up, and the room was used for other purposes when the board wasn't meeting, but it was owned by the district and so on. I'm sure none of you have ever been in that room when it was used for that purpose. Except maybe Chief Lambert if he's still on the call. So my question is, I know the district, well, I gather that the district is looking to create new facilities. And I'm wondering if this is going to be on, is going to be part of that affair, because it's just my feeling that it would be important for the district to have its own meeting room. Make you guys seem more dignified for one thing. In a good way, it's just I don't know, it just seems more appropriate or well equipped or something. And it's an artifact of the Orinda district being set up for a smaller agency, and the Moraga district being set up for a smaller agency, and the two of them not even put together can't really accommodate the district's needs. So my question is if and when a new admin building and so on are conceived, is a new meeting room part of the plan? Thank you.
If I may, Director, I think it is one of our goals to have both a training center and a space that could be used for a meeting room. However, our priority on the new project is the securing of a space and the construction of a fire station that's appropriate for the 5 men and women who operate out of that station. We have not yet gotten to planning phases that would include things such as a meeting room.
better that the firefighters be safe than we be dignified. Anyway, I appreciate Jonathan's comments. They're appreciated as always. And we open the matter for public comment now on 12.2.
We do not have any more hands raised or written public comment.
All right, then I will close public comment. We are ready at this point for a motion to be made.
I'll make a stab at a motion.
Go ahead.
I make a motion that we provide that we return to in-person meetings with the virtual option of using Zoom beginning March 2023, and that we do this at in Orinda at the Sarge Little Hall meeting room. And Zoom as well. I'm not sure of Zoom as well as YouTube. In the single location.
In other words, we're incorporating by reference the staff report as
There you go.
communicated in the full motion of 12.2.
Okay.
I'll
Sounds like-
second it. I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion made and seconded, so we invite comments from members of the public relative to this motion.
And we do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
Did we have did I open it
This
for
is an
deliberation?
actionable item. It asked for guidance.
What's that?
It asked for guidance. It didn't ask for a vote. It says provide direction.
Well, don't we have to agree upon that direction?
Yes, sir. If I may, if it were contentious, I think it would be helpful to provide a vote. But if the board is in agreement that this is generally what's done, then I don't believe it requires a voice vote.
Okay,
I mean, I'm happy to vote, but but
well, can we adopt it by acclamation?
Well,
Yes, sir. I believe I've gotten the direction.
we can all give him
all right.
our feedback by acclamation. How's that?
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, bear in mind, it's not noticed as an action item, so you can give them direction, but you actually can't
Right,
adopt it.
that was my point. Yeah.
okay.
So we
yeah,
can't vote on this one.
Okay.
But we can all tell him that that's our that we agree with the direction of the motion. How's that?
I agree with the direction of the motion, and to the extent that I'm agreeing with the rest of the board, that's the direction I'm giving.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
Yes. Yes.
That's settled then.
Thank you, Director.
All right. Good work.
Agenda item 12.3, establishing an ad hoc committee to develop plans for expanding the fire prevention program. We will take input from staff and ask questions for clarification on this agenda item.
And directors, at the last meeting, a director expressed an interest in forming an ad hoc committee to develop plans for expanding fire prevention program. Staff is here to facilitate the opportunity for the directors to discuss this and then provide direction with regard to establishing an ad hoc committee that then will facilitate with regard to scheduling and experts input, staff reports, et cetera. So I leave it to the board for discussion on this item.
I will open the discussion item on the agenda for board deliberation. Maybe we can ask Director Jorgens. I was just going to suggest that you chime in here.
Okay, so yeah, I was the one that put it on the agenda. I just think that, you know, the staff's really busy, and I think it would be reasonable to have a couple of our directors get together and do some brainstorming and find out what, you know, other people have found successful in the grant program. We have a bunch of money left in the grant program. The whole idea is to actually get things done and get the wire distributed and get the, if we're going to do, you know, rain gutters, you know, whatever we might want to do to actually get more things to happen in our community, more positive fire prevention things in our community, which is the purpose of the grant in the first place, or the grant funding in the first place. So I thought we should just put together a committee and to kind of help the staff, and looking for help from the staff too, but certainly help the staff and just brainstorm and think about best practices for this to try to facilitate the acceleration of our good work in preventing, you know, fire damage in our neighborhoods.
Do other directors have thoughts on the issue?
Would this be not beyond what is currently granted, the current grant, or is it just the grant specifically? Are we looking for other ways to expand maybe fire prevention programs, other ones?
I personally would be looking for other ways to expand. I mean, we would probably have to go in and reauthorize what the grant money could be spent for, because I think it had some pretty specific constraints. But we should be coming up with, I would argue, we should be coming up with ideas that are broader than the current constraints that we have. Very broad things. And then it might require that we go back and reauthorize the money to fund that, because at the moment, I think it's got a fairly narrow authorization window.
Right. So the function of the committee would be to explore recommendations that would be brought back before the full board.
Exactly.
Without taking as much staff time, right?
Right.
That's the plan we wouldn't be utilizing. Okay.
Chief Winokur, do you think that would save staff time? Does that make sense?
I defer to the board. I think obviously the question with regard to staff time really comes down to how much input or staff support this committee would require. But I defer to the board on that.
I wouldn't envision that we would use hardly any. So, other than casual conversations and things, but not like, other than that.
Without imposing on the limitations that all of us have on our valuable time, I'm guessing Director Jorgens would be willing to volunteer for the ad hoc committee that he's suggesting. Are there other directors who would be interested in serving on a board?
I'm happy to help. I'm happy to help. I probably don't have the experience, but I'm happy to help.
Do directors think it would make sense? I mean, I would be happy to help as well, although it seems that it would make some sense to have some geographical balance, having one director from North Orinda and one from Moraga. Seems like it would make sense to me. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Director Danziger, I mean, I don't think it matters, but it's fine with me. If those two want to do it, I'm okay with it.
Any other director comments or questions? Then I think we could invite comments or questions from the public relative to this agenda item.
We have one hand raised. I am opening the timer. Jacob Arola.
Go ahead, Jacob. Welcome.
Hey, good evening. Thank you. I just had a question to see, do you guys have any anticipated costs associated with this committee? Thank you.
Personally, I wouldn't assume it has any costs at all. No. I don't know that any committee we've ever had any costs, actually.
It's all volunteer time from the committee members. I mean, unless Captain Rolo's comment has to do with the possible expansion of the grant, the amount subject to the grant, but that would have to be a further board decision anyway, in any event. So
Yep.
There's no direct cost that I can see of.
Right. I agree.
We do
Yes.
not have any more hands raised.
All right, well, then I will close public comment and we move on to what's next? I think
We have to vote on it and appoint the people, which we kind of did, but we have to formally do it, I think.
Don't we have to, do we have to open it again? We just had it open to public comment. I think we have to find out whether there's a motion that's going to be made first, right?
Right. So I make a motion that we establish the ad hoc committee to develop plans for expanding our fire prevention program.
And appoint the people to it.
Sure, and appoint. I guess should I make it
Appoint you.
forward? Okay.
right.
Myself.
Do we have a second?
Second.
I'll second. Yeah.
All right, we open it for public comment.
We do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
I open it for board deliberation. If there is no deliberation, I guess we vote then, correct?
Correct. Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens,
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. can we back up? Did we actually establish who's on the board? Or do we need a separate motion for that?
No, we did. I
Okay.
was on it and I moved that it was going to be Greg and me.
It was my intention, just in case the record was clear, that we not only establish the ad hoc committee, but that we had designated Director Jorgens and Director Hassler, and both of them will accept that committee assignment. Is that correct?
Yep.
Done.
Thank you.
All right. So we go on to a regular agenda item 12.4. And this is the mid-year budget review fiscal year 2023 and approval of the general fund revenue budget adjustment increase in the amount of $393,363, a general fund expenditure budget adjustment increase in the amount of $195,370, and authorize an operating transfer out of the general fund into the capital projects fund in the amount of $3,100,000. We will take input from staff on the matter on the agenda item.
Good evening, directors. The mid-year budget review has been prepared. In the interest of meeting time efficiency, I'm going to provide the board with a high-level overview of the mid-year budget review. Feel free to ask questions as I go through the slides. There's one change that needs to be made that Marcia had highlighted on the slide before introducing the item, and that is that the agenda recommends a budget adjustment to decrease the general fund expenditure budget $195,370. I made a mistake, and this is incorrect. The recommended action needs to be changed to increase the general fund expenditure budget $195,370. An amended agenda highlighting this change was posted today at 5:15 p.m. and the change is also reflected in red and strike through on this slide before you.
For clarification, I am aware of that. I read that, and when I read the agenda item, I read the correction rather than the original.
Thank you. So we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. All right, the original budget projected a general fund surplus of $292,000. The updated projections through Q2 project a surplus of $502,000. Next slide. General fund revenue is projected to exceed budget $393, primarily due to higher property taxes. Expenditures are projected to exceed budget $195,000, primarily due to increased overtime, which is offset by 5 vacant firefighter paramedic positions and also operating expenses less than budget. Next slide. This graph reflects general fund revenue by month. Actual revenue reflected with the green line is trending slightly higher than the orange line, which is budgeted revenue. Next slide.
Can I interrupt and ask, is that somewhat attributable to the large number of sales of property and a higher either anticipated or actual assessed value of the property once they change hands?
That is right. So for the property tax revenue is coming in higher than the budget, right? And primarily that is from what is called supplemental property tax revenue, which is the result of when properties change hands and the property tax basis then is reassessed higher.
Thank you.
This slide illustrates general fund expenditures by month with the green line reflecting actual expenditures, which is trending below the orange line, which is the budget. Next slide. This graph details ambulance activity. The vertical bars show the number of transports by month for the current year and the prior year. The gray line depicts current year revenue, which is trending slightly less than the budget, which is the blue line. Next slide.
So even though we've had more transports, we've had less revenue.
I think the trend, well, I'd have to see what the total is, but yes, some of is let's see, let me check. Because the blue bars, several months, those were a little bit less than the orange, but I don't know what the exact total is, but it's pretty close. So then we end up with less revenue when there's write-offs and so forth. This graph reflects strike team activity. A surplus of $437,000 is projected this fiscal year. Next slide. This graph details monthly cash flow. The district started the fiscal year with $18.7 million in unrestricted cash and investments. The district drew down on the investment balances until December, when we received the cash from the December property tax revenue payments. The cash and investments balance at December 31, 2022 was $21.3 million. Next slide. The district started the fiscal year with $15.1 million in general fund unrestricted fund balance. The projected surplus would increase the unrestricted fund balance to $15.5 million, which would exceed the fund balance policy minimum of 17% and be less than the policy goal of 50%. Projection would end the year at 45.5%. Next slide. Staff recommends 2 mid-year general fund budget adjustments. The first is to increase revenue, $393,363. And the second is to increase expenditures, $195,370. If the budget adjustments are approved tonight, the revised general fund budget surplus would be $501,985. Staff also recommends the board authorize the operating transfer out of the general fund into the capital projects fund in the amount of $3,100,000 in order to accumulate funds for the Station 41 administration rebuild project. Next slide. The capital projects fund has a projected surplus of $1.8 million due to the budgeted transfer in from the general fund of $3.1 million. The debt service fund has a planned use of reserves of $1.7 million due to the final pension obligation bond. The bonds were paid in full on July 1, 2022. The Tunnel East Bay Hills Fuel Break Fund has a projected surplus of $360,000. Next slide. This is the last slide. Staff has provided 2 financial updates this fiscal year. And the next updates will be for quarters 3 and 4. Staff recommends the board adopt the general fund budget adjustments and operating transfer to the capital projects fund. This concludes the presentation.
Just one question. The budget adjustments are for the amounts year to date, right? Those are actual amounts year to date that we're authorizing the transfer for, not a projection for the end of the year, correct?
For the operating transfer?
They're the actual amounts as of today, not any type of projection.
No, they're projections, right? So I projected.
For the end of the year?
Yes, I projected through June 30, 2023. So then the adjustments will reflect what those projections are.
Okay.
Sure. Vice President Romer, I have a question.
Go
So,
ahead, Director Jorgens.
so are the, I get the revenue. I understand how all the revenues got better. Can you go back over the $195,000 and kind of tell us, kind of what the big items in that are?
Yes, absolutely. Are you able to back up, Marcia, to the expend? I think it's slide, let's see, number 4, I think. Actually, slide 3, please.
There we go.
All right. So on the right-hand side is the expenditures, which are projecting to exceed budget, $195,000 in total. So salaries are less than budget, $380,000, because we have 5 vacant firefighter paramedic positions and 1 vacant fire inspector plans examiner position. At the same time, that's offset by the overtime, which is exceeding budget $900,000. And that's up from the vacancies. It's also up from workers' comp increases. We've had more lost time because of workers' comp injuries. Strike team overtime is exceeding budget $270,000, which is part of the revenue offset as well, because the revenue offsets the strike team overtime. Then retirement contributions are less than budget because of the vacancies. A little bit for the OPEB contribution, truing that up to the most recent calculation. And then finally, the operating expenses are less than budget, $294,000. And that's primarily due to the home hardening grants expenses that are not, there were about $50,000.
So in reality, it's actually all overtime, because all the other things are negatives.
Let's see, negative, yes.
Well, other than the $16,000 just kind of around the air.
Correct.
So it's really just overtime and the overtime. So, okay. I mean, we normally budget for overtime, as the chief just described earlier. You know, we've got the 57 versus the 51, and you know, all of that. I get that, but so it really is basically then, because we forecast that, or do we forecast that? Is that something that I think maybe he said we don't forecast that we make it up in the mid-year? Is that right?
Yes, we budget for the 57 authorized positions and with a lower overtime amount.
All right. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Short and sweet. Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Sorry, Vice President Romer, I have a question.
Well, I think this is the time I open it for discussion on the agenda and ask further questions of staff. So you're in order, Director.
Okay, you know, we have the home hardening grant program, and year to date, you know, we allocated $500,000. You can see that on the budget. We've spent, you know, somewhere a little over 60,000, I believe, at this point. So we have, you know, a large sum of money that we allocated to the grant program. Could you just explain to us that, so where that money is, that money right now that we have, which is over $400,000, that's in a line item for home hardening grants. So that's just in the general fund, I assume. Do we need, I guess my question is, and I'm fully supportive of the program, but do we need to have that 500,000 like there? I mean, can we shift it around? Anything else we can do with it? I mean, you know, even if we spent a lot between now and the end of the fiscal year, I mean, we're still gonna have quite a surplus in there, and I'm not looking to take it away. I'm just wondering about that large sum that we just have sitting there.
It is going away. That's part of what our excess is that we didn't spend it.
If I may, Director Danziger, any revenue that, anything that's in the general fund that's not spent at the end of the year just drops into the unrestricted reserve. Because it's not a restricted fund, it's not being accounted for somewhere else. It still accrues towards the general fund. And as with any of our funds, when we underperform on expenditures, any additional money other than obviously for capital or restricted funds, but that money just drops right back into the unrestricted reserve and is accounted for. Certainly, if the board provided such direction, we could modify the size of that fund, in which case it would, generally speaking, it would transfer into the unrestricted general reserve right now, as opposed to at the end of the year. But from a staff perspective, the guidance was given to create this fund, or to create this line, and to allocate that amount of money to it and use that money to service the grant program. And that's what we'll do until the end of the year when we do the true up. That's particularly true on a new program like this, where we don't have any history. And so it's very hard to forecast. Obviously the board provided direction and we funded it. And so this would be the sort of thing that, as part of next year's budget process, would certainly be appropriate for the board to review the performance of that program to date, and to make a decision with regard to funding or a decision with regard to either expansion or contraction of the program as part of that budget process.
That's kind of what I was getting at. So thank you for that explanation.
And that's part of what the new committee's for.
Sure. Understood. Okay, that's kind of what I was getting at. All right, thank you.
Any other comments or questions by board members?
Vice President Romer, I had one more question.
Yeah, go ahead, Director Hassler.
The 3.1 million for the capital projects fund, that was budgeted and planned, right? That is part of our plan in our effort to reach our goal for funding Station 41. Is that a planned a planned transfer? It's been planned into the budget.
Yes, it was part of the original budget that was adopted last June.
Okay.
Unless there are other board comments or questions, we'll invite comments or questions from the public relative to agenda item 12.4.
We do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
So I move that we adopt resolution 12.4.
Do we hear a second?
This is not a resolution.
Well, it says you want to be authorized to operate a transfer out. It says approve and then it says authorize.
This is a motion. It's not a resolution, but yeah, you vote on a motion.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
I I move that we call it a motion.
right.
Move that we approve motion 12.4. The motion in item 12.4 has that.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Having a motion and a second, we move to public comment on this motion.
And we do not have any public comment.
I will close public comment and open it for board deliberation. Any comments by any board members? Hearing none, I call for a vote.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Motion passes. Agenda item 12.5 on the regular agenda, determine the amount of the OPEB trust contribution and the amount of the pension rate stabilization trust contribution for fiscal year 2023 and authorize the transfer of district funds to complete the trust contributions. Staff report, please.
Good evening, directors. The district participates in the PARS Trust for other post-employment benefits and for the pension trust contributions. The budget includes $350,923 for the OPEB contribution. The most recent actuarial valuation calculated the current trust contribution slightly higher at $366,640. For a pension trust contribution, the budget includes $2,108,577. The amount and timing of both contributions is subject to board authority. Staff recommends the board determine the amount of the OPEB trust contribution and the amount of the pension trust contribution and authorize transfer of district funds to complete the contributions. This concludes the introduction.
I open it for board discussion and further questions if necessary.
So, Vice President Romer.
Yes, go ahead, Director Jorgens.
So, Lorianne, we normally approve the amount that the actuary tells us to put in the OPEB rather than some other random number, which appears to be close, but don't we normally approve the amount the actuary tells us to put in?
Yes, that's what has been done in prior years.
Okay, and that's a slight, the numbers aren't up here anymore, but that's a little different than what we have in the budget, right?
Correct.
Okay, and on the pension rate stabilization trust, it wasn't in the, I didn't see it in the board packet anyway. It said, you know, did we update because I know the Cicera numbers that we get went up to like 10.7% or something, 10 point some percent. It increased quite a bit, and I don't think we had anticipated that big an increase. And so did we run those new numbers back through GovInvest to come up with our number?
Yes, because the Cicera rates came out about approximately a year ago now. There's an 18-month lag. So yes, those Cicera rates are included in the PARS trust contribution calculations.
Wow, they came out a year ago, huh? So they're going to be really low. Meaning that they're going to be a lot, it's going to be a bad news next year because their portfolio went down a lot in value for sure, even though they won't tell you yet. And you know, all the other, everything else, all the outflows are predictable and the inflows are not predictable. Except that we now know that they're a lot worse because last year was a horrible year for returns and it still is. Wow. But at least we got up to date at that far, I suppose. Okay.
Yes, sir. And just to clarify, the reason there's a deviation on the recommended contribution to the OPEB trust fund from what was budgeted, the difference has to do with the updated numbers from when we put together the budget back in April, May, June of last year. And the full actuarially recommended contribution continues to be the number that's listed on the staff report.
So we're going to be, sounds like we're going to be underfunding our pension rate stabilization fund then, and probably the OPEB too, but for sure the other one.
Well, the OPEB, yes, sir. The OPEB has very little. There's not a lot of volatility there, but on the pension stabilization trust fund, as we get the updated Cesara numbers, that will certainly change, compounded by the fund's return and its losses over the last year. Those two factors will come together. It's reasonable to anticipate that the future actuarially recommended contribution will go up, but there's a lag both up and down, rising and falling market.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions
Yeah.
or deliberation?
Yeah, I
ahead.
do. This is Director Danziger.
Go ahead.
So
Susan.
regarding the pension rate stabilization trust, I know the purpose is to pre-fund, and we use the Go Invest software to come up with that amount. Do we have I'm just curious, because maybe it was there sometime in the past. Do we have a cap? Is there a cap? Is there a limit on how much can be in that fund? I mean, are we trying to get to a certain number?
It gets yeah, it does. It gets metered by how much we think. It always is there to fill the gap that we feel, because the GovInvest software determines what Cesara is withholding and what their long-term forecast is, and then we use a different discount rate than they do, and
Right.
it tells what ours is. And as soon as it gets to the end, then it makes the software makes our contribution go down and down and down. So it does. It effectively has a cap, assuming Cesara, there is something between what they are predicting and what we're predicting. Yes.
So, I mean, is there ever a limit? I mean, do we ever are we ever going to reach a point where we've put in enough?
Yeah, our long range financial forecast shows that our contribution out, closer to the end of that is zero.
In 20 years?
Oh, not that far out.
The long range financial forecast doesn't go out that far, sir. But generally speaking, there's really two factors. There will always be a delta between Cesara's projected returns and our projection of what Cesara will return, because the board is directed using a lower discount rate.
Mhm.
However, the calculation anticipates that the fund's returns at some point cover that delta, at which point there would be an actuarially recommended contribution of zero due to the reinvestment of the funds. And the board is yet to provide direction with regard to distribution criteria for when we would, under what circumstances the district would draw down from that, other than to say essentially it's a rainy day fund. But that guidance has not been established, and that would be a board function to do so.
And so do we have it just did it based on what you just said? So you saying that we don't actually have a policy on the use of those funds?
Well, we have a policy on the use of those funds. Yes, sir. It's a restricted reserve, so they can only be used for pension stabilization payments. With the board established the fund. The board has committed in principle and executed in practice on an annual basis, making the full arc after a 3-year ramp in the first 3 years that it was established. But the board has not established an internal policy that would guide the distribution of those funds, other than the limitation that because it is a restricted reserve, it can only be used for this purpose.
Only be used for that.
And the rainy day fund was to not have a recurrence of what happened. I don't know, it was like after the 2008 crash. There's always a lag in these things because Cesara takes a while to catch up. But I don't know, roughly 2010, we got really close to running out of money, and so this way we know we can always make our payments without having to do other traumatic things, which we did last time. And which is basically we didn't let anybody go. We just didn't replace people that left. And so that's what we're trying to avoid in all of this.
Okay. That makes it much clearer for me. I thank everyone for the explanation, and hopefully that was helpful to the new directors as well, because
Very helpful.
it is complicated. I think. Okay,
It
thank you.
is. Thank you. All right, I'll invite comments or questions from the public relative to this agenda item.
We do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
I will close public comment and move to find out whether there's a motion and a second.
So I would move that we make the actuarially, that's hard to say this time of night, actuarially recommended contribution, which I think is slightly different than what we had in the budget for the OPEB. And again, the numbers aren't out here, so I can't quote them. But
Are you saying you're saying the 350,923?
Yes, I don't have it in front of me. But
Okay.
yeah, that and whatever it's like 2.1 million or something, or 2.3 for the pension rate stabilization trust.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Oh, and I'm going to jump in and ask a question because Director Jorgens, you said you wanted the actuarially determined contribution, which is $366,640, the higher amount.
Right, the higher amount, exactly.
Oh,
All right,
That was the one, just for confirmation, that's the one that was determined by the actuaries,
Yes,
right? Not our budgeted amount. Okay.
exactly.
right.
So I'm saying what I want to do what the actuaries say is the right answer.
Okay. I second that.
Okay,
I second.
so I invite public comments or questions relative to this motion.
We do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
I will close public comment and open it up for board deliberation on this motion. Hearing no deliberation, I call for a vote.
Director Danziger,
aye.
Director Hasler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens,
Aye.
Vice President Romer.
Aye. Opening regular agenda item 12.6, resolution 23.06, a resolution of the Board of Directors of the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District nominating a director as a representative of special districts on the Contra Costa Local Agency Formation Commission. Staff input, please.
Good evening, directors. The Contra Costa County Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, consists of 2 city members, 2 county members, 2 special district members, 1 public member, and alternate member in each category. The district received correspondence from the LAFCO executive director, which advised all independent special districts of a vacancy in an alternate seat. In the correspondence, pursuant to Government Code Section 56332 and the procedure of the Special District Selection Committee, Ms. Teixeira announced the special election and called for nominations. Interested candidates must be nominated no later than April 3rd, 2023. As an independent special district, MOFD is entitled to nominate a maximum of 1 board member. It's worth noting that at least in recent history, we have not had a member of the MOFD board sit on LAFCO, and we don't have any anticipated business before that body. However, it certainly be within the board's purview to nominate a member for consideration to sit on that board.
Thank you. I open it up for discussion on the agenda item. And
Yeah, I
further
would just-
questions. Go ahead, Go ahead, Director Danziger.
Okay, I would just say there's about 40 different districts eligible. And since we haven't had a seat on that board before and we don't have much business there, I would not support, unless someone really wants to do it, I'm not in support of us nominating anyone.
I would agree.
I agree.
Unless somebody can tell me why we would need to do it, or why it would be in the interest of the Moraga-Orinda Fire District to have someone representative, I don't see that it justifies our time.
And not only that, it's not even a representative, it's an alternate.
It's an alternate, yeah.
An alternate,
Yeah.
okay. I say we move on this one quickly. Let's invite public comments.
We do not have any hands raised or public comment.
I close public comment. Let's move on. Well, it doesn't sound like we need a motion unless the motion is not to nominate someone. Is that right?
Yeah, if nobody makes a motion, then it's dead.
Nobody makes a motion, then we don't have to go on to public comment either, correct?
Correct.
All right, then I'm going to go ahead and close that agenda item. Unless somebody's objecting and not giving us time to further procedure, I don't see any point in going ahead with that motion.
Okay.
All right, committee reports, 13.1, Standing Audit Committee. Are there any committee reports? The Ad Hoc Committee Facilities Station, Directors Danziger and Jex, 13.2. Is there a committee report?
There's nothing to report right now.
Any report from the Ad Hoc Committee to investigate?
Yes. Yes,
Go ahead.
I have a report. Director Hassler and I are on that ad hoc. So I've done quite a bit of research on this one, and I'll just give you an update real quick. I've had two conversations with Congressman DeSaulnier's office on this. And so this, just a quick background is Contra Costa County received funds under the American Rescue Act of 2021. They voted to give most first responders approximately $2,500. Some got other amounts. So we were formed to look into, the possibility of our fire district getting some of those funds. These were federal funds. Special districts were not included in that funding bill. So I contacted the congressman's office on two occasions. I spoke to somebody on his staff. They were aware of this, that special districts were not included. And then Senator Sinema of Arizona, with a co-sponsor of Senator Feinstein from California, they sponsored a bill that would have included special districts to get some of those funds. But that bill kind of died in the Finance Committee of the Senate. It would have amended the Social Security Act. And Congressman DeSaulnier and Congressman Garamendi had also were sponsors of a very similar bill in the House of Representatives, and that also failed to get any votes. They were also working. So at the present time, our congressman, as well as our Senator Feinstein, were aware that special districts were left out of that funding. At the present time, the congressman's office is going to, do what they can to try to bring it back, possibly attaching it to some other bill if it comes up. But him and one of the issues with getting funding for special districts is special districts are not found. They're found quite frequently in California, Texas, Florida, Colorado, a few other states, but not in all 50 states like they are here. And so there's not a lot of support for giving money to special districts. But it's on their radar. I did get a just the last piece is the senior assistant at the DeSaulnier's office did give me a webinar to look at, which I haven't had the opportunity, because I was going to talk to our staff to see if we have an access to this webinar. You needed some kind of code. So it's an access that would enable us to see a webinar, which was about accessing aid, this type of aid for special districts. So at the present time, unfortunately, I don't see any funding coming down the pipe for our special fire district, but it's on the radar, and we'll just keep abreast of it. I guess we can keep the ad hoc committee. I don't think we have to get rid of it, but there's really nothing else for us to do. If we want to get rid of it, I think we could at the present time. So that's it.
Thank you, Director Danziger. Any other directors have thoughts on particularly the matter of, seems like this, go ahead. I've read procedural resolution, I'm supposed to let all the other directors talk first. So I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Well, thank you for all your research.
Yeah.
I think I'd leave it up to you guys whether you think it's worth continuing to have the committee or you want to be disbanded.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything else for us to do. I think, now that it's kind of on my radar at least, and I think I'll follow if there's anything to come up with, but I don't think we need the ad hoc committee on our committee reports every month anymore.
Yeah, I would
We
agree.
did- We did all we did all we could. And we said we would, we tried, and that's about it.
Well, I appreciate your efforts as well. Procedurally, do we need to agendize it on our next meeting to dissolve the ad hoc committee, or can we do that by motion now?
I would recommend that you agendize it.
Yeah, I think we should.
All right, then do we need a motion to agendize it?
After we get to that point in the agenda.
You do not need a motion to agendize it. Any member can ask that it be agendized at the end.
All
At the
right.
end, but you do that later.
Do
Yeah.
it later. Okay, if Director Danziger can make a note to do that, then we'll move on.
Yeah.
13.4, the ad hoc committee for joint fire prevention with the city of Orinda, Directors Jorgens and Romer.
They haven't met yet.
No, so nothing to report at this time. Items 13.1 to 13.4, public comment is open, and I invite comments or questions from the public relative to these agenda items.
We do not have any hands raised or written public comment.
I close public comment. 14.1, future agenda items. Here's
Here we
your
go.
cue, Director Danziger.
Thank you. I'd like to put on the agenda to an item to disband the ad hoc committee that was tasked with investigating the one-time COVID-19 payments to our members.
Okay, so that's done, correct? No further
Yep.
action needed?
And you can't, nobody else can even comment on it.
Okay,
I
so
have,
any other future agenda items?
Vice President Romer, I do have two others.
Go ahead.
So I think we've, our current standards of coverage is significantly out of date now. And I think we should ask the chief to come forward and tell us what the process would be and have an agenda item to discuss updating our standards of coverage. That's one. I think we also, I find our accounting very challenging to read when we mix in all these into our general budget, all these special funds we get, and it all ends up in our budget. So I'd like to have an agenda item to talk about how we can make our budget, the approved budget be kind of what it is and keep the other items in separate funds or whatever it takes to make it so that we don't intermix all of those other revenues and expenses into things and make it hard to understand what our real budget is doing, our operating budget is doing. So that's again, that's something that we can discuss if people want. I just want that as an agenda item we can discuss, and then they can, the staff can, either we can have a board discussion and give staff direction or not. And the last one is we currently have a funding vehicle and what used to be an off-balance sheet funding vehicle that we've used for significant capital expenditures. I think a couple of our fire trucks are in that, and I think, or one of them, our fire equipment, I'll call it. And I think at least one of our buildings, maybe two, are in that vehicle. And I think that vehicle has been, with the recent changes in, what's our financial accounting standards for? It's not FASB, it's the government, GASB, whatever the thing is the government uses.
Gatsby.
I think they have about 3 years ago made that vehicle no longer acceptable because we have to put everything on our balance sheet. So I want to understand how we're going to sunset that vehicle that we have, because many of us are board members on that board, if you didn't know.
All right. Any clarification needed with regard to those three agenda items, Chief?
No, sir. Direction received will bring back agenda items to propose what we could do, have a substantive discussion from the board and take specific direction from the board out of that discussion.
Thank you. Director Danziger?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have one more, and it doesn't have to, it can just, it can be in the future. I'm not talking about next month. I'd like to see an agenda item on where we're at, a report on where we're at with the Station 43 funding, the financing.
43.
43, we're still paying for Station 43.
Yes,
Right.
sir. That's the financing corporation. That'd be included in that item, sir. It's the only thing that's still carrying, we're still carrying debt through that vehicle for.
Is there any like detail to see on that, or?
We could certainly provide the interest rate and the payoff schedule and the options for essentially the only option really is to accelerate the payments.
And that's, I guess, thank you, Chief. You have a way of synthesizing this for me. That's what I'm looking at.
Yes, sir.
All right. So we could agendize that and just include it with the third agenda item that Director Jorgens just proposed. Right. Go ahead, Director Jorgens.
And I'm sorry, I have one more that I forgot about. So
Okay.
at the moment, I think, the number that was in there for our $20 million that's on account with whatever our county fund is that we invest our short-term cash in, at least as of December, was earning about 2%. And that's roughly half of maybe a slightly more than half, but roughly half of what the market is for money market accounts. And so I would like to understand, and it's real money we earn. I mean, on $20 million, you earn a lot of money in interest when you earn an extra 2%. So I would like to understand what our options are for that. And at the moment, I'm not sure we have an option because I know we have historically used the tier plan to borrow money when we needed to, but luckily we're getting so we potentially don't need to do that. And so I'd like to understand what our alternatives are, and also is if we happen to pull out, can we go back? So.
Yes, sir. We certainly do that. It really, it's our use of the county treasury, which puts us in the life and gives us the ability to access the teeter plan if we have as an advance against property tax revenue. But we could certainly provide more information about that to include what the alternatives were and what the return on funds invested with those alternatives. Obviously, as a public agency, there are limits on what where we can put money and what the money can be used for once it's put with them. But we could bring that information back with the directors. I may need to ask for a little more time for that one, given the relatively heavy load that we're putting on Glorianne and Mary with the funding corporation and the accounting presentation discussion as well. But so if I could ask for a little bit of flexibility on the use of the county treasury, that may be worth carrying over to a future month, just to give a little more room for those impacted staff members to work through this well.
So my preference would be, since it's real money that we're, again, 2% per year, is on $20 million is a lot of money. So my other agenda item doesn't have a current economic impact, especially. So I'm happy to delay that one, and I'd rather have the one about that actually costs us money every month earlier.
Yes, sir. Understood. Thank you.
You want to prioritize those additional agenda items and prioritize the 20 million 2% / issue to the number one priority?
Right.
Is that doable, Chief?
I mean, I don't know.
Well, it's not. I mean, that's okay.
I think I have the direction required, and just ask for a little bit of flexibility from the board that the timing on bringing these items back may be a little staggered.
Okay, by me.
At 2%, which is half the rate, we earned $78,000 in 1 month. So it's
Yes, sir.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Any other future agenda items? Hearing none, let's move on.
If I may, sir, I just like to read these back.
Go ahead.
We do spend some time scrutinizing the recording of the meetings to make sure we got it right. So we had an interest in more information about an agenda item to discuss updating our 2016 Standards of Cover document, bring that back. A agenda item to sunset the COVID-19 Ad Hoc Payment Committee. And then in prioritization order, a review of our use of the county treasury and the LAIF fund relative to alternatives. discussion of the funding corporation, as well as the liability, specifically the payments remaining on Station 43, the time horizon remaining, the amount and options associated with that. And then a discussion of mechanisms to simplify the presentation of our accounting, to simplify or ease the degree to which folks could understand how we're doing relative to our adopted agenda.
I.e., can we put things in separate funds so we don't have to mix all the numbers together?
Yes, sir.
Did you cover the one about the special fund? I know there was the payoff of the loan, but I thought there was one where there was equipment and a special purpose vehicle.
No, sir. It's we have a funding corporation. The only outstanding liabilities for Station 43 is previously was used for the purchase of rolling stock, but those loans mature.
Those are no longer held. And those are no longer held. Okay.
And if we're thinking that that's some sort of a, like an LLC, thing that is a separate entity that doesn't have liability, et cetera, I think we're all on the board, number one. And, if you look at piercing the corporate veil kind of law, if we think it's really not on the balance sheet, the fact that we have never had a board meeting and we don't send out regular, statements on this sort of thing, there is no way legally that that's actually a separate entity anyway, relative, because it's a subsidiary of us. And so it's just absolutely, there's no way that that is actually a separate entity as it is. And we account for all in one entity also. So it's already, but for me, the reason I'm worried about it is we're all on the board. I don't know about you, but my liability insurance, my personal liability insurance cares how many boards I'm on. And that's an extra one. And there is liability associated with being on boards, potentially. If we, for example, didn't happen to pay our bills.
Do we ever clarify whether the board's members are covered by a director's and officer's liability insurance policy?
Oh, thank you. I'll add that as one more thing. I'd like to understand how much D&O insurance we have as directors.
I would too.
And how much it costs so we can see if we want more.
Yeah. I think that was brought up at the last special orientation board meeting.
It was, yes, sir. The information was provided to council and they're reviewing it.
Okay, good. All right, thanks. Any other clarification needed on the agenda items for next month?
And we're doing the next one in person, is that right? We agreed to that, right?
Yes.
We're required to, sir. Yes, sir. The COVID the COVID special circumstances expire at the end of this month.
Okay.
Okay.
Public comment open. Board has invited comments or questions from the public relative to the current agenda item.
We do not have any hands raised or public comment.
Close public comment. We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Director
Motion.
Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler,
Aye.
Director Jorgens.
Aye. Oh, well,
President
don't forget
Romer.
we have to adjourn into the private closed session again, right? We're not doing that.
No, well, I thought we covered that in the closed session, and that's going to be.
So the direction provided was to query the directors to schedule a closed session at a subsequent date prior to the end of the month.
Okay.
Right, I thought we covered that. So, okay, so your vote, Director Jorgens?
Aye. Yes, whatever.
We're
And-
adjourned.
We're
Yeah.
adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Good job tonight.
Okay, so I vote aye to adjourn as well.
All right.
And good job tonight. You ran it very well.
Thank
Yeah.
you, appreciate it.
Thank
Thank you all, everyone.
Bye.